Very good evening to all the listeners and aspirants uh, who are trying to attempt this exam. Uh, Welcome to you once again to this second lecture on optional English, on the subject optional English. So, today, once again, we have with us Dr. Gurunath Badigir sir, who will be delivering his lecture on poetry, Unit 2 poetry today. So he will be discussing with us some of the important topics, some of the important poets whom we have to focus, keeping the examination in our view. And he will also be sharing some of the important techniques related to the answering of questions related to poetry in this particular examination. After his presentation, there will be a section for open for discussion wherein you can post your questions, wherein you can post your questions in the comment box, and we shall take up the questions for discussion. So, once again, I would like to welcome you, sir, to today's lecture on poetry. We are happy to have you again.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So, yes, sir. So, shall we start, sir?
Yes, sir. No problem.
Yes. So, please share your slide with me.
Yeah. I think it is already there or it is
No, no.
disconnected.
Somehow it got disconnected. So, just share
Oh,
it once
okay,
again.
sir. It's
Yeah, yeah. It is
now
now visible.
visible.
So,
Okay.
you just let me know, sir, when I should add the slide. I can show it to the viewers.
Yes, sir. We
So,
shall.
yes, sir. So, over to you, Badgir, sir.
Thank you, Akshay, for your kind words. And today I will be talking about the second unit in the syllabus, English poetry. Yesterday, I have given you an overview of the whole syllabus prescribed for the optional paper, and today my talk would be on poetry. As far as second unit is concerned, uh, there is something about English poetry, something about the poetry in English. You know, English poetry is different, a poetry in English literature, because we are talking about literatures in English. There are some poets, poems from the other than British poetry. But basically, we are focusing much on British poetry, as number of poets from British poetry are taken into consideration by the syllabus setters here. Uh, to begin with, we all know what is poetry, of course. I don't want to spend much time on poetry, meaning of poetry. There are many definitions of poetry. Poetry is a musical composition, poetry is a metrical composition. Poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. Some people are talking about personality theory, some people are talking about impersonality theory. Okay, poetry is a composition, of course. You know that poetry has been much liked by all people for a variety of reasons because it has its own sweetness, it has its own value as far as the thought is concerned. So there is a thought, there is music, there is rhythm, and for which poetry is always liked by many. And today I will be talking about English poetry. My lecture will be divided into two sessions on this particular unit, poetry, because I'll be using one more session for the other unit, that is unit number 4, wherein I will be talking about English language teaching in India, problems and perspectives. But here, as Akshay told in the beginning itself, I would be giving you some overview of poetry, and would be answering your questions, because most of the participants wanted to know what is important in this particular syllabus. So, keeping in mind your interests and anxiety, I would be talking about the important aspects and certain techniques how one can understand English poetry. Let me try, because I am not master of everything. As one of the fellow teachers, I may be sharing some thoughts with you. And I request Akshay to share the slides now. I have few slides actually. They are just indicative, and they are not exhaustive, in other words, because these slides will just remind you the important aspects of um, English poetry. So the next slide is necessary here. Yes, we will be talking about origin of English poetry. We know that oral literature in England was dominant during the Middle Ages. Normally, in all cultures, we talk about oral literature. Here in Kannada, we are talking about Janapada Kavya, we are talking about narratives, legends, various folk uh, forms of literature which are transmitted from time to time. So obviously, in English culture, because we talk about the origin of England and that the origin of English language in 6th and 7th century, we talk about Old English period, Middle English period between 11th century to 15th century, and then Modern English period. So language, as such, we see the Old English period between 7th to 11th century. It was during this time lot of oral poetry was available, and it is in 14th century we see the rise of formal poetry. That is the significant thing. Whenever we are talking about origin of English poetry, we talk about the pioneers of English poetry. And whenever we talk about 14th century, the immediate name that we remember is Geoffrey Chaucer, Langland, Gower, Lydgate, and Watt and Surrey. We don't want to mix them with this particular group. We'll again take up Watt and Surrey when it comes to Elizabethan poetry. So, when it comes to Geoffrey Chaucer is always important, because whenever we talk about any anthology, English anthology begins with Chaucer. We have an anthology called Chaucer to Houseman. Okay. Why Chaucer is very important is the question. Chaucer is important because he is the first recognized English poet. Chaucer is important because the works of Chaucer reflect 14th century society. Chaucer is important because there are influences on him. There is a French influence. You can see, of course, Chaucer, he was influenced by other languages. But one important aspect of Chaucer, whenever we take up him as a poet, for his portrayal of characters, the quality of portraying a character, how to describe a character, that's beautifully done in his Prologue to Canterbury Tales. Prologue is always important for study for two reasons. One, prologue provides you a beautiful understanding of 14th century society. You can rewrite the social history of England while reading Geoffrey Chaucer's Prologue to Canterbury Tales. It is in this particular prologue Chaucer speaks about various sections of English society. Although English society, like Kantapura, where Rajarao is talking about four sections of Indian society. In Chaucer, we find this kind of portrayal from upper class to the lower class. You see a knight, you see the squire, you see, then you have another class of people. You have a church class, you have ruling class, you have peasant class, you have artisan class, you have artist class also. So all these people are in fact portrayed beautifully. We are talking about Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, the pilgrims moving to Canterbury. They meet at Tabard Inn. In some book it is said 29 pilgrims plus the Tabard. In some book it says 30. So these pilgrims meet at Tabard Inn, and the context is beautifully analyzed by Chaucer. So, variety of persons. What is the condition of women in the society? What is the condition of a church person? A parson, priest, okay, nun. What's the condition of farmers in the society? Summoner, wife of bath. How? See, this women are treated in the society. So we will get a kind of a panoramic view of 14th century society when he describes characters in his prologue to Canterbury Tales. That's why prologue is important. And later you have the book itself, Canterbury Tales, and how the tales are told. That is another part of a story. But more than Canterbury Tales, prologue, achieves a greater significance than the book Canterbury Tales itself. Different stages in the life of Chaucer is also discussed in some books, and you can focus on that. And Longland, Gower, Lydgate are comparatively minor poets compared to Geoffrey Chaucer in 14th century. I want the next slide to be present. So, coming to 15th century, because we are talking about the gap. If Chaucer appeared in 14th century, there seems to be some kind of a gap in England, which we call Dark Age. It is during this time we talk about War of Roses, the White Rose and the Red Rose between the two royal families. You can also see 100 Years' War fought between England and France. So this period is known as the dark period in the literary history of England. And that's why, we hardly discuss what has happened. But some important incidents happened here. As you know, the fall of Constantinople took place in 1453, and it's because of fall of Constantinople, the wide range of exodus, the movement of scholars, philosophers, writers from Constantinople to Italy, and how Italy became the center of new learning. And Italy is an attractive place, and all people begin to go to Italy, whether it is painting, whether it is sculpture, whether it is poetry, it's drama. For everything in Europe, Italy was the center of learning. And England was not an exception to this fact. And people begin to flood to Italy. And what they brought back, it's purely because of this Renaissance. The Renaissance happened in England in the end of 15th century and beginning of the 16th century. So many things happened in England. So many political developments happened. So many religious changes happened in England. So obviously, if Renaissance brought about new learning, What is new learning? You know very well that they imitated lyrical poetry, they imitated drama, they brought home different types of writings. By this time, Greeks are already famous for writing epics, famous for writing lyrics, famous for writing ballads, and they are very good at writing full-length plays. And for that reason, study of Greek and Latin was considered a very important aspect in everyone's life. Latinate gentleman. So, studying Greek and Latin, like we study Sanskrit here, studying Greek and Latin was both passion and fashion for everybody. And this brought new understanding about poetry because England was not introduced to this kind of poetry. They didn't know what is epic. They didn't know some new forms of new genres of poetry. So this is because of Renaissance. Because when you say Renaissance, it is rebirth of new spirit. It's some kind of understanding of new knowledge. It's complete overhauling of all the old ideas and borrowing of new thoughts. That Renaissance brought Reformation too. Is how it directly helped lyrical poetry, how it directly helped the 16th century poetry, you know. Reformation is mainly because of translations by Wycliffe, Tyndale, Coverdale, and how Bible was available in English, how there was a secular rule because of Queen Elizabeth, and how England was called nest of singing birds in 16th century. These are all certain developments which helped the development of poetry. That's why we call 16th century as the golden age of poetry and drama in England. So these aspects are necessary. Why there was lyric, why there was sonnet, why there were some narrative poems. So this is a completely a robust age of songs and sonnets. That's why they used the title Songs and Sonnets for uh, Tottel's Miscellany, which was published in 1557. So it's a combination of songs and sonnets. And it is said that more than 200 poets were recorded in 16th century in such a short time, in such a small country like this. And what we should look into, Watt and Surrey. Watt and Surrey I brought in here. They are the pioneers of English sonnet. We should look into Watt and Surrey. They travel to Italy and come back to England with sonnet form. So they should be remembered for these reasons. Watt followed Petrarchan model. Petrarch is said to be the pioneer of Italian sonnet, and he was writing sonnet is basically a love poem, a poem of 14 lines written in iambic pentameter. There is some rule for that. And Watt followed Petrarchan model, 8 plus 6, octave and sestet. Octave constitutes 8 lines, sestet constitutes 6 lines, with ABBA, ABBA, CDE, CDE as the rhyme scheme. And Surrey modified this sonnet to suit the English idiom. Surrey changed 8 plus 6 pattern into 4 4 4 2, 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 2, 3 quatrains. Quatrain is a stanza of 4 lines and couplet is a stanza of 2 lines. couplet is a rhymed one. And Surrey modified the sonnet to suit the English taste and idiom, and that was later known as Shakespearean sonnet, because Shakespeare mastered this sonnet. Because of his mastery over this kind of a form, Surrey's name was overshadowed, and William Shakespeare's name was stamped on this form of poem. It is popularly known as Shakespearean sonnet. So Surrey should be remembered for pioneering Shakespearean sonnet. And for these reasons, we should remember Watt and Surrey, focus on the form only and pioneership. As far as Philip Sidney is concerned, your focus should be on the thematic concerns in Sidney. Sidney's issue is how his sonnets deal with the sorrow, frustration, disappointment of a lover. His love for Penelope, who married Lord Rich, and his sonnets continuously speak about his appeal. An appeal is a poem. Appeal to a lady to love him, not to leave him. So Sidney's Astrophil and Stella, a sonnet sequence where he considers himself as Astrophil, a Greek character, and Stella, a lady character. So this is a famous sonnet sequence. Some important sonnets and the theme and the person to whom it is addressed is significant here. When it comes to Edmund Spencer, I request the change in the slide if possible. Yeah, Chaucer works reflecting. Yeah. Yes. Edmund Spencer is known as poet's poet. Edmund Spencer is also remembered a child of Renaissance and Reformation for a variety of reasons. Spencer is poet's poet because he has set a great model to English poetry. The most comprehensive and the important versifier in English. A towering poet. That's what we say, the greatest non-dramatic poet of 16th century. That's why we remember Edmund Spencer. Spencer's important aspects are his narrative quality, his pictorial quality. Okay. Yes. If possible, I will change. Yeah, I have this key. I can do that. I can change the slide. Okay. The issue is Edmund Spencer is to be studied as a sonneteer, as a poet of great narratives like Fairy Queen, as a pastoral poet, his pictography. So Spencer's role and as a pioneer of Spencerian stanza, you can call it a father of Spencerian stanza because the stanza is named after him, a 9-line stanza. He's called the child of Renaissance and Reformation because his poetry inculcates, imbibed in it, the very essence of Renaissance. The essence of Renaissance is again new learning, again the very discoveries. The essence of Renaissance is humanism because humanism talks about glorification of human body, the beauty, the ugly, everything is pictured properly in the poetry of Edmund Spencer. When you talk about Fairy Queen, focus on the design of Fairy Queen, how he wanted to write 12 books talking about 12 virtues that we are supposed to follow: tolerance, truth, love, various aspects, 12 months, 12 virtues, 12 books. Of course, he was not able to complete all the 12 books in his lifetime, and he did write only six, and the seventh remains incomplete. So, your focus should be on how Fairy Queen is considered as an elegy, as an allegory. What is allegoric poetry? What are the indirect references here? How Fairy Queen is none other than Queen Elizabeth. There are a variety of characters in different books. You can focus on first two books, it is good. And if you read little more on other books, it's okay. So the very character of Gloriana, Una, Duessa, and the bad characters that we come across, the conflict between the good and the evil, the truth and untruth. So, Fairy Queen should be studied as an allegory. And who are the characters alluded here? Who is Prince Arthur? Who is Queen Elizabeth? What is exactly the allegory? These things can be looked into. Focus can be more on first and second book, and knowledge of other books is necessary. And Fairy Queen is also known for its wonderful pictography, pictorial quality in Spencer, how he picturizes nature, how he picturizes people, word painting. We call it word painting. That's a great quality that Spencer developed in his life. That's why we should remember Fairy Queen for this reason. And we can also think of Shepherd's Calendar as pastoral poem, Colin Clown Come Home Again. So he wrote wonderful poems like Epithalamion, Prothalamion. And apart from that, those wedding songs, he is remembered as a great sonneteer in English. As a sonneteer, he wrote Amorati. Amorati contains 88 sonnets, and his sonnets are addressed to Elizabeth Boyle, with whom he was engaged and later married. So it is not like Sidney's sonnets. There is no disappointment in love. It is a celebration of love. It is a celebration of companionship. That's the major thing we look into the sonnets of Edmund Spencer. In that way, Edmund Spencer is important. As far as Edmund Spencer is concerned, Spencerian stanza, Spencer's qualities as a great poet, as a major poet of 16th century, non-dramatic poet of 16th century, Fairy Queen and its design, his other poems, sonnet sequence. These things are to be focused while studying for this. Coming to William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare is considered as the greatest dramatist of all times. A poet, a dramatist. And I'm not going to talk much about his dramas here. He was the greatest tragic genius, he was the greatest comic genius. So he not only wrote the greatest tragedies in English, like Othello, Macbeth, King Lear, and Hamlet, but also wrote wonderful comedies like As You Like It, Midsummer Night's Dream, Winter's Tale, Twelfth Night, besides writing some chronicles, some romantic tragedies like Romeo and Juliet, Pyramus and Thisbe, Antony and Cleopatra. Shakespeare's dramas contain number of lyrics, whether it is Under the Greenwood Tree, All the World is a Stage, Quality of Mercy. Each dialogue is a poem sometime. When you're talking about to be or not to be, that is the question. A Soliloquy and Hamlet is also considered as highly poetic. Blow, blow, brief candle, life is a tale told by an idiot signifying nothing. In Macbeth is also considered as one of the most important poetic line. All the world is a stage. We are merely the players. We have entrances and exits. Man plays 7 roles. Again, a famous dialogue in As You Like It is considered as poetic. Under the Greenwood Tree, Midsummer Night's Dream, all these, his comedies have wonderful poetic pieces. Apart from writing lyrical poetry or lyrical dialogues, because William Shakespeare used blank verse like Marlowe, because blank verse is called Marlowe's mighty line. William Shakespeare mastered the use of blank verse in writing his poetry. So, when it comes to Shakespeare, our focus should be on some of the lyrics, but major focus is on sonnets. When it comes to sonnets, again, 154 sonnets of Shakespeare are divided into 2 important parts. As far as the sonnets number 1 to sonnet number 127, it is said that he has addressed his sonnets to W.H., his friend. There is a controversy about who is this friend. That is another question. But here he addresses his friend to go for. He is the most handsome, smartest person, and he should not die without, getting a children. He should leave behind the stamp of his personality. He should leave behind his um, mold in the form of his children. That's a continuous request in because life may fade, but you will live in your children. You will live in your grandchildren. We are talking about ghosts, Henrik Ibsen's ghosts. Our grandfathers, grandparents live like ghosts in us. We imbibe so many qualities of our grandfathers. There is a continuous appeal in Shakespeare's sonnets from sonnet number 1 to sonnet number 127, addressed to his male friend W.H. There is also some kind of a controversy what kind of a relationship they have. That's not an important thing here. The important thing is what Shakespeare appeals in these poems. So, sonnet number 116 is considered as a famous poem. True love. True love is not a marriage of 2 bodies, but of 2 minds. It is in this particular sonnet he speaks about love is not just between a man and a woman. Love can be anything. It should be the marriage of two minds. It is not time's fool. It's not a bending sickle. It's tested by time and tide. So, sonnet number 116 is often quoted. But when it comes to sonnets 128 to 154, around some 25 sonnets, these sonnets talk about Dark Lady, maybe Anna Hathaway or Dark Lady. He writes about the relation, he writes about his love for the lady. Sometimes he writes very strangely when it comes to sonnet number 130. Um, he writes very, very differently about his mistress. My mistress's eyes, my mistress's walks like, no, her hair are like wire. Such kind of words are used, and that you have to focus what kind of sonnets are written on Dark Lady. Thematic concerns in the sonnets of William Shakespeare. So he wrote also narrative poems, whether it is Rape of Lucrece and Venus and Adonis. So they are erotic in nature, and that can also be discussed as, for a reference sake, you can talk about various poems of William Shakespeare. But the major aspects are sonnets of William Shakespeare, whom they are addressed. Major sonnets of Shakespeare should be studied as far as the examination is concerned. Then we talk about metaphysical school of poetry. In metaphysical school of poetry, we talk about John Donne. Not necessary, Akshayji. In fact, that slide is not ready. I'll be speaking extemporarily on John Donne, and will provide you necessary notes on that. Metaphysical school of poetry, when it comes to metaphysical school of poetry, it's a new school that we see in the end of 16th century and the beginning of 17th century. John Donne and his group. Metaphysic is not philosophic. Actually, the word metaphysics was used by John Dryden, who affected the very metaphysics, who came out with a new kind of a thinking for the first time. That's what I told you in the other lecture, that if the Elizabethans played with words, the metaphysicals played with thoughts. The poetry is thoughtful. The poetry makes you think, actually. Sometimes they question. Of course, metaphysical poets wrote variety of poems. So they wrote religious poems, secular poems, love poems. And most of the poems, in fact, either make you think or make you smile at yourself. There are certain poems wherein you see the use of wonderful conceits. John Donne is a master of metaphysical school of poetry. When it comes to John Donne, he wrote wonderful poems like Death Be Not Proud, Sun Rising, Canonization, okay, Busy, Old, Unruly Sun, questioning the entry of sun. You have wonderful conceits in John Donne, two lovers are compared to two legs of compass, and a flea is compared to the real union. The bridal chamber is not a real union, but flea, which sucks the blood of both the lovers, is the real. So, conceit means two far-fetched images are yoked by violence together. Two far-fetched images are forcibly yoked by violence together. That's the simile. When you are talking about lovers, you are talking about living creatures, but you are comparing them to two legs of compass. Compass is non-living object. There was something that you compare your love to rose. My love is like red, red rose. You compare your love to some flowers. You compare your love to something else. That's why Elizabethan convention. But here, they compare it something else. You're talking about a union of two lovers. When Shakespeare is talking about the union of true love is true love, it is in mind. He says that the union of lovers happens in the flea, a kind of a mosquito, which sucks both the blood of a lover and the beloved. They they either satirized the Elizabethan convention of poetry, or they simply mocked at it. There is one poem like Lovers in Finiteness by John Donne, in which he speaks about, oh, I'm not that kind of a lover. I give you all my love and you should give me your love. Otherwise, I will become a bankrupt. If you give my love to someone else, that's a very funny and but very realistic in nature. In that way, John Donne should be remembered for the use of conceits, and the whole group of metaphysical school of poets are in fact talking about the use of metaphysical poetry, metaphysical conceits is to be uh, highlighted here. That is one thing. We will give you some points on Crashaw, Herbert, Herrick, Lovelace, and important poems will be sent to you. I am making a list of all these important poems. I will share with you very soon. Since we have less time to discuss all poets, because in two sessions I am supposed to complete discussion on poetry. That's why I would be using little time on major poets, and when it comes to minor poets, I will share some notes with you. This again, I continue with the discussion on the poets. We come to John Milton. John Milton, what is important in John Milton is to be discussed here. John Milton, after Edmund Spencer, Milton is said to be the greatest of English poets, greatest epic poet of England. Milton lived in a very different kind of an atmosphere. It is altogether different from that of Shakespeare and Edmund Spencer, because they had a different kind of a queen, Queen Elizabeth. That's why England was bubbling with joy. They loved their queen, they loved their language, they loved their country, lived intensely, thought intensely, wrote intensely. That intensity was very much felt in 16th century England. We don't find this kind of intensity in post Shakespeare in England or post Elizabeth in England. And we see some kind of philosophic thoughts, metaphysical school of poetry. Then the entry of Puritanism. In the history, it is said that Oliver Cromwell became the Prime Minister of England during the Commonwealth regime. Theatres were closed. Writing of romantic poetry was banned. And it is during this time what kind of poetry is expected from a person like John Milton. John Milton wrote, of course, he was a great classical scholar, and he wrote wonderful epics. Milton should be considered for his epic, particularly Paradise Lost. And Paradise Regained is a sequel to Paradise Lost, but Paradise Lost is given more significance. And particularly, Book 1 in Paradise Lost is important. Of course, you need to know the overall knowledge of Paradise Lost, but Book 1, there is a serious discussion. The theme of Paradise Lost, as you know, is fall of a man. And you know the Bible story, the Genesis in Bible, how Milton recreates the story told in Genesis, the story of Adam and Eve, the fight between Satan and God, the fall of Satan, rising from the hell, the story of Inferno, the story of Pandemonium, how Milton speaks. Milton, that there is something by glorifying the ways of God, Milton unknowingly glorified the ways of Satan, because whenever we are reading Paradise Lost, we think that Satan is the hero, not Adam, not Eve, not God here. Satan speaks. That was actually the need of the time to talk about liberty, because he lived in such an age of curbs, age of, you know, locking the theaters, prohibition. It was during this time Milton emerged as the champion of liberty. And Satan represents this kind of a champion spirit. Satan speaks his mind. He says, I would rather ready to rule the hell than to serve the heaven. If a battle is lost, everything is not lost. Mind is the hell, mind is the heaven. You can make hell heaven, heaven hell. Very robust optimism is found in Milton. Of course, the story is known to you how Milton designed Paradise Lost in different books, and how Satan tries to disturb the Eden garden by poo-pooing Eve, Eve eating the fruit of knowledge, the fall of man, how God gave death to man. These are all the stories there are, how Abe was born, how different words are discussed here. So when it comes to Milton, Miltonic similes are to be highlighted. Milton used grand similes in Paradise Lost. The scheme of Paradise Lost is necessary. This is one part of the story. Paradise Regained, I don't think it's very, very important as far as the examination is concerned. I don't think, but one need to have some kind of overview. But when it comes to his sonnets on his blindness, when I consider how my life is spent, Milton's sonnet, Milton's Lycidas is considered as very, very important. Lycidas is considered as one of the greatest pastoral elegies written in English. Milton's Lycidas, Shelley's Adonais, Tennyson's In Memoriam, Arnold's Thyrsis. These are four great pastoral elegies in English. So, Lycidas, how he mourns the death of Edward King, that is to be, in fact, highlighted in this. So, I stop at this point here and we'll take up remaining poets in the next session. Now, the session is open for discussion for another 10 minutes, as it was told by Akshayji. And we will take some questions. And it is good when there are questions and we discuss them here. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. It was a nice, elaborate discussion on Elizabethan poetry and even pre-Elizabethan poetry like Chaucer. Most of the time, what happens in our regular syllabi, Chaucer is almost kept aside.
Roshni.
But he is the most important poet we need to consider as far as the competitive exams are concerned. So, dear listeners, we are open for discussion. You can post your questions here. So, there is one question I think you have already answered to this. What are the important sonnets to study, as there are many sonnet sequences?
I have made it clear to you because
Yeah, yeah.
whenever we talk about sonnet sequences, we mentioned so many, whether it is songs and sonnets published in 1557 or Estrophe and Stella and Amoretti by Spencer and 154 sonnets of Milton and some sonnets of 154 sonnets of William Shakespeare and some sonnets of Milton. As Akshay said, we have discussed those things, but there is one technique I tell you. Whenever we talk about competitive examinations or examination in general, we normally talk about the most antholized sonnets, means most discussed sonnets in university curriculum, in college curriculum, anthologized sonnets. So I talked about these anthologized sonnets, and you can also again browse through various websites. Whenever we talk about, even when you go to Poetry Foundation, when you go to Spark or Gersever, all the sonnets are not discussed. Few sonnets of because all may not be classics again. You remember T.S. Eliot's famous essay, What is Classic? Classics, all the writings of even a classic writer are not classics. So these things you have to do. If possible, if I find time, I will share the titles of the sonnets also. But I don't give more promises to you because I will try my best. But at the same time, this is the technique of identifying a good poem. Okay. If you write famous sonnets of Shakespeare, you will get what are the famous sonnets. Famous sonnets of Watt and Surrey. That will be there.
So there is one more question from Gayatri G. This is the question. So some poets not only wrote poetry but also lyrical drama, novels. Should we study them too? I think the answer is yes for this question. Yes, sir. You can elaborate on this.
uh, but for the point of examination, whenever we study certain authors under the heading poetry, actually, what I want to explain here is when Shakespeare is studied as a poet here, poetic works of Shakespeare need to be highlighted. Apart from knowing something about his dramatic or prose or whatever, because Milton wrote Areopagitica. Milton wrote some papers also, and Lily wrote something. And modern poets are multifaceted, like T.S. Eliot wrote criticism, drama, poetry, essays. But our focus should be, because what is our experience is that when Shakespeare is prescribed as a poet in under the poetry section, more of a poetry should be studied. When Shakespeare is included in drama section, more of his important drama should be studied. uh, your focus should be like that. If you go on studying each and everything of that particular person, that will take years to answer everything.
Yes, sir, that's true. And English literature, and even when we consider poetry, it's like a huge ocean. So most of the times, even when I was studying for net and set examinations, this
Hmm.
question would trouble me: should I read all the poems completely? But then it is impossible to read all of them completely. We all, as aspirants of these exams, must remember that these exams are these exams are for eliminating the 94%. When we speak of net examination, the passing percentage is 6% only, so they want
Uh,
to eliminate the 94% of all the candidates. So definitely they will ask questions from some corners which are unseen. As you said, they will ask from the poems that are not
sometime.
anthologized more. Yeah, so yes, it is a bit tricky one, but with practice I think this comes.
Yes.
Yeah,
One
there
has
is one
to,
more.
in fact. Yes,
Yes, sir.
please. Please, please.
There is this one more question. Can I read poetry development as types of poetry forms? Example, elegy, its development, origin, definitions. Uh, some poets who wrote about the elegies, themes, and so on.
I understand uh, what you mean to ask. Uh, but as far as this particular syllabus is concerned, one need to know different genres and its origin. But you need not focus on development. One can understand what is lyric, its meaning, and important lyricists. But focus on the lyrics of a particular author prescribed here. The same is the case with sonnet, origin of sonnet and important sonneteers in general, but focus on the important sonnets of the poets prescribed here. And it holds good with all other genres. Because again, I told you, focusing on origin and development of all the genres will take again a very long time. It has been done in the different respective syllabus, curriculum of universities and colleges already. That information is enough. But if you are not clear about genres, if you are not clear about certain aspects of literature, you can go back in the Wikipedia manner or Britannica manner only. But when it comes to thorough study, you focus on a particular click more. Okay, more information is on the author study and encyclopedic kind of information on other aspects what you asked in the question box.
Yes, sir. So there is one more question, sir. Um, is it important to know all the tales of the Canterbury Tales?
Not necessary, not necessary. Again, my answer remains same. Important tales are different. So those important tales can be studied only. As far as prologue is concerned, you need to be very specific about all types of characters there. But it is hardly, I will again, I told you what are the tales to be focused, will give you in the form of a note to you. But in prologue, you need to know all the characters, important sections of the 14th century society. That's the main crux in Chaucer's reading.
Yes, sir. So there is an interesting question here, whether questions cover only syllabus or beyond the syllabus.
It has to be according to the syllabus. Sometimes, some things happen, um, but all the candidates hope. Um, all the candidates hope that the question should be from that. We most of us are also teachers. Sometimes, if we, you know, are eccentric, we want to test little more. What Bacon says, if you want to be more and more scholastic, sometimes broader level questions are asked, but it is not actually the method. And syllabus is given to the setters, and they are asked to set questions on the syllabus prescribed, and there will be three types of questions: easy, medium, and difficult, EMD. And all, if there are 100 questions, it is said that 30-35 easy, 30 to 35 medium, and 30 to 35 difficult questions. So difficult questions aimed at testing the comprehensive knowledge. Easy questions aim to test at overview of knowledge. Medium questions aim to test of your understanding of author's text. So this is the method actually. Okay.
Yes. And there is, I think we can take one more question and
Yeah,
complete our
last question.
discussion today. The last
Yes.
question for today. Before we go to the last question, sir, there is another comment here, which I think you can take up in tomorrow's class.
Yes.
Please
Yes.
explain about various types of meter and rhythm like iambic, pentameter, hexameter. So I think, sir, we can do. It is very difficult to explain all the types of meter in one class. So I think you can suggest to them some resource material where they can study prosody, and you can just mention a few details about prosody in tomorrow's class.
Yes. Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
Yes.
That can be done.
Hmm.
There is one beautiful book, Practical Criticism, Cox and Dyson, and
Okay.
one more book. I remember. I have that book. I will show you.
Sure,
But
sir.
even glossary has all this.
Yes,
MH Abraham's
glossary,
books
MH
contains
Abrams. Yeah.
this. Um, we can discuss, of course, because it is prosody is that kind of a book. What Bacon says, you require a deputy.
Yes, sir.
Some books are to be read with a deputy. It means you require a guidance for that. Yeah,
Yes.
where there are my 50 men and women, a thing of beauty is a joy forever. How you have to use stress, unstressed syllable, and how you have to identify the meter, how you have to identify feet, rhyme scheme. I have little material on that. I can focus. We will explore. If possible, we will go for an extra class also after having a discussion. But I will certainly mention this.
Yes, sir. That's good one, sir. Then we have this last question for today. In syllabus headlines, metaphysical poetry, cavalier poetry are mentioned. Below that, a few poets are mentioned. Shall we study all the metaphysical writers?
Again, I told you the same thing. First, our focus should be on the writers mentioned and remaining as a school of poetry and important poets for general purposes. We should understand Lovelace, Herrick, all the people available, Marvell, Andrew Marvell. But here, the focus is on, again, the Herrick and John Donne, which has been mentioned in the syllabus. We need to have overall view with a little more focus on the poets prescribed here.
And there is this last question, another question: is it enough to read poem summary? Yeah, I think you, since you cannot read all the poems, it is good to read the summaries and its analysis. As sir told, there are websites like Spark Notes, Grade Saver. Analysis is important rather than summaries,
And
so you can.
important
Yeah, yeah,
lines,
important
oft
lines.
quoted lines, oft quoted
Mm.
lines are there. One need to remember
Yes,
that thematic
yes,
concerns,
yes,
significance of a particular poem.
yes. So I think the students have no doubts so far, and if there are any, sir will definitely take up those doubts in the next class, because tomorrow again we are going to meet for the discussion on poetry, in
Six
which
o'clock.
in which the remaining syllabus related to poetry will be covered, and sir will also tell us some important tricks and techniques. It when it is examination, it is all about not just knowledge, it is all about strategies as well. So sir will be discussing few more strategies with us in tomorrow's lecture on poetry. um, so please note that tomorrow there is a little change in our timings, since sir has some other work. He has requested me to change the time, and we will have the class on poetry tomorrow at 6 o'clock instead of 4 o'clock. So please note the change in the timing, and we shall meet tomorrow for the continued discussion on poetry. Again, we will be happy to meet you tomorrow, sir.
Thank you. Thank
So,
you.
yes, thank you so much for sparing your time today and giving us valuable inputs for poetry, sir. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you very much. See you tomorrow.
Yes, yes, sir. Thank you. So, dear listeners, that's all for today. We will meet tomorrow at 6 p.m. Thank you.